Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a flavored stout from a brewer. It's been quite a while since I've reviewed one of their beers. I've had probably 4 or 5, but it's definitely been a long time since I've reviewed one. So we're jumping over and we're checking out a beer from Odd 13 Brewing Company. They're based in Lafayette, Colorado. This specific beer is called Hazelnut Uppercut. It is a stout clocking in at 8.7% ABV. And it's got added hazelnut and chocolate. So I'm expecting a little bit of a Nutella vibe here, though without the lactose, it's not going to sweeten it up. So it's not going to taste like actually dipping into a jar of Nutella. At least that's what I'm guessing. It's just going to taste like a nice roasted malt bill with chocolate added and hazelnut added for different nuances. So I had actually rather forgotten about this. They do some pretty cool label art on their cans. Here it's got kind of a hazelnut-headed little cartoon lady boxing in the corner. It looks pretty cool. There's a few brewers that do neat artwork like that. These are one of them. And they also go further to tell you some more specific details into other beer ingredients. So hops, they used Eureka, malts, Golden Promise, Munich, two-row, oats, Carafa Special 2, and Crystal 75-85, as well as double roasted Crystal. So they've got a really nice, interesting mix of malt bills. Eureka's a pretty clever hop choice. We'll see how it plays out in this beer style. But yeah, I love it when a brewer gives you a lot of information about the beer. It's kind of a beer nerd. It really helps you to break down and help figure out some of the nuance in some of the beers. So if you get enough of them where you can start comparing, hey, this specific style beer was brewed with these, and here's the common traits, and here's the ones that are different. You can really start to hone in, especially if you're not brewing yourself with these specific ingredients, or maybe don't have access to these specific ingredients. Kind of help you hone in and, oh, that's the quality of that specific ingredient. That's what it does to a beer in terms of texture, in terms of aroma, in terms of color, in terms of flavor profile. So yeah, always interesting. I love it when a brewer gives more information than maybe is necessary to the average person. The other thing that I noticed here, they did not call this an Imperial, and maybe it would be stretching it on the low end, but this is definitely a significantly higher than average ABV for stout. 8.7. I think it's kind of in that gray area where you could call it an Imperial if you wanted, but they did not. They just called it a stout. So without further ado, we're going to get this Hazelnut Uppercut cracked gently. Poured right in the old stout glass here. There it is. Okay, this is a pretty dark brown. It's not pitch black as it's pouring out here. It seems to be relatively active in terms of carbonation, so I'm not expecting the craziest head is going to retain. Might form a decent head. I don't think I'm going to get a ton of retention out of this one. And I can see some of the natural oils from the hazelnut definitely floating in top. I can see making a little stick around the ring. So they definitely use all natural ingredients here. Yeah, even clinging on the sides of the glass as I'm holding it up, I can definitely see a ton of carbonation activity. So this one's quite active. Yeah, that head's basically settled out of the way, as it were. It is pitch black. For a standard stout, that's pretty impressive, actually. Let's get right up over it for a good sniff. Okay. So yeah, there's definitely an aroma of hazelnut I'm picking up. Chocolate is subtle. The hazelnut comes through quite clearly, and there's actually some underlying kind of sweet aromas to it. Even some kind of vinous quality to it that does put me in mind of grapes or wine or grape juice. So it's got an interesting nose. It's not just strictly hazelnut and chocolate. It's got some other kind of brighter characters to it that come through on the nose. Yeah. Smells really nice. I love the aroma of hazelnut. That's one of my favorite ingredients to add to a beer, especially in a dark beer style such as a stout. I think it pairs very well. I absolutely love the flavor. So we're going to jump in and see how this one from Odd 13 tastes. Okay, so this beer, it's not as brash and in your face maybe as I was expecting for a nearly 9% stout. What I can tell you is that hazelnut is very, very, very prominent on the palate. There's not really a chocolate as in cacao plus sugar sense to it because it's not a sweet beer. But some of those aromas that were giving off kind of vinous and kind of grape-like aroma qualities to it, a slight fruitiness, do translate in the glass as well. And maybe there's a slight suggestion of sweetness from that kind of flavor coming through, but it doesn't taste sweet per se. The hazelnut comes through quite clearly, and you could taste the underpinning of the malt bill, but it's not nearly as intense as you might expect that it would be in a beer like this in this ABV range. So you can taste it, and it's definitely on the roasty side. So you're getting these earthy, bordering on kind of smoky kind of characters coming out, but it doesn't taste like Rauch beer. Again, we're talking, it's been a while since I've made this analogy, but akin to say the depth of roast you would get on a French or an Italian coffee bean, that deep dark roast that really brings out these underlying earthy characters, but it doesn't taste smoky. It's pulled just before the smoke point so it doesn't get burned. That's kind of the quality I'm getting out of this. So it's this big kind of earthiness coming through from the malt bill, pairing with this very intense hazelnut flavor and just subtleties of chocolate. The chocolate is more subtle in the flavor profile than it is on the aroma. So it's got that in tandem with these still kind of vinous-like qualities that are coming through into it. And it's kind of an interesting beer. I'm a big fan. I love hazelnut. Hazelnut goes great in a beer. It definitely works well here. Very, very clear aroma and flavor. So I'm going to jump back in. I'm going to take a second sip, let these flavors re-intensify. I'm going to pick it apart a little more. We'll talk about the body and the mouthfeel, and then we'll get to the finish as well. Very nice beer. Take two. You swallow, it's just big burst of hazelnut. It comes through so pungently, so clearly. And that's first and foremost, it's in the forefront. After about 5 seconds is where the underpinning of the malt bill really starts to open up. It's just deep roast and earthiness with this dominant hazelnut flavor floating on top. The chocolate is subtle. It kind of mixes in between the hazelnut and the malt that comes through in this beer, but it's very, very nice. This is for sure a hazelnut dominant beer, both in aroma and in flavor. I personally love it because I'm a massive fan of hazelnut. It just works well, especially in a dark beer like this. It's just something inherently earthy about it and nutty, and it's got a very distinct flavor that just works in a dark beer in particular for my money. So, body and mouthfeel. The body on this one, I would say is medium, maybe bordering on medium heavy. It's not a very, very heavy beer. In terms of the mouthfeel, this isn't one where it feels super silky or creamy. It doesn't get foamy when you agitate around the palate, but you can feel that nearly 9% ABV in there. There's a good bit of resistance when you agitate around the palate. So body and mouthfeel, pretty close to what I expected for a beer in this ABV range. Now, let's talk about the finish. As tasty as the flavor profile is, and as enjoyable as that is up front, where this beer is really impressing me is the length of the finish and how the flavors kind of linger on the palate. So hazelnut is a big, bold, pungent ingredient. It's definitely pungent on the aroma. It's very, very pungent in the flavor, but it really, really lingers on the palate. This is an intense flavored beer to only be 8.7% ABV. It is punching well above its weight class for sure in terms of length to finish. And it's dominant hazelnut that really just seems to linger all over the palate, as well as underlying earthiness and roastiness from that malt bill. So while it may feel a little bit skewed when you first sip on this beer, where it really impresses me is with the finish side. So yes, it's delicious on each sip, but this finish is really, really impressive. This is a very, very long finish. Indeed, you get a ton of mileage on each sip. It is pungent, lingering flavor on the palate that just, I mean, it's probably been a minute again since I've had a sip. It is not even hinting at dissipating off of my palate. And I think a large part of that is maybe the camera can, I don't know how well or poorly the camera is going to pick that up. You can see the natural oils floating on top, and I talked about it as the head was forming from the hazelnut that they used. That, I think, is probably a large part of why this has such an impressive finish. The natural oils not being filtered out, oil is going to stick, and it's got a ton of flavor compounds as well as aroma in that natural oil from the hazelnut, and I think that's part of the key to how this beer presenting itself how it does. But regardless of the outcome, it absolutely is fantastic, and I am a fan. I'm going to take my time, sip on this beer, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this one ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Odd 13 Brewing Company's Hazelnut Uppercut, a stout brewed with hazelnuts and chocolate, clocking in at 8.7% ABV. Odd 13 Brewing Company is based in Lafayette, Colorado. So starting with the aroma, this was one of those beers that just jumped right out at you. It was a very pungent aroma, smelled really, really nice. The hazelnut was readily apparent. The chocolate came through as well, though not quite as powerfully. It had some interesting kind of vinous and other kind of fruity qualities that came through as well. But a nice smelling aroma that was quite pungent. Aroma gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, I really enjoyed this one. As I stated, hazelnut, I think, is a really great ingredient choice in a beer, especially in a dark beer like a stout. And this was just another case example for my opinion. It really works well with a nice roasty malt bill. And the chocolate, of course, kind of like a Nutella style vibe, but again, no lactose. So it was just the base ingredients coming through. The hazelnut was very, very readily apparent on the palate. There were some of those underlying kind of fruity and vinous qualities that came through in the end as well. The chocolate really binded to that roasty malt bill on the back, but very, very delicious beer. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body, this had a nice weighty body, maybe not quite as heavy as I anticipated for pushing 9% ABV, but it was substantive. The body gets a 9 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, similar story to the body. It wasn't quite as thick and quite as lush as I expected, but you could definitely feel the resistance. It was a lot more resistant than your average beer in this ABV range, and really more or less the body and the mouthfeel felt right for the style and for the ABV range. The mouthfeel gets an 8 out of 10. For the finish, this was one that really surprised me. For a stout that's just got 2 ingredient flavors, it's no barrel aging at all. Sure, 8.7%, but it's not double digits. This thing had an impressively long finish, and it was really the intensity of that hazelnut and the underlying malt bill roastiness on the back end that just pushed really, really long. I mean, impressively long finish. Tons of mileage after each sip, and it tasted so clean at the end. Absolutely fantastic. Finish gets a 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one, it was just okay. I thought it was on the low end of average. It tried, it did okay, but it collapsed very, very quickly. Really didn't even have that much residual cling or any pad on top at all. I think a large part of that is just due to how intense the carbonation activity was in tandem with the natural oils, from not straining them out of the batch from the hazelnuts. That actually does make it a little more challenging for a head to form in my experience, because I've brewed some beers with nuts and experienced a similar thing. But low end of average, it is what it is. It gets a 4 out of 10. For the appearance, this was impressive. Not quite 9%, it's not a low ABV, but I didn't expect it to be actually truly pitch black, and it was. It looked the part, proper stout. Appearance gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance, I really enjoyed the balance on this beer. Relatively simple formula. A bunch of different malts chosen in the right ratio and quantity, and paired with hazelnut and chocolate, also in the right ratio and quantity, and it really worked well together. Hazelnut and stouts go very well hand in hand. Chocolate also does. You pair the two together and you have a litany of different malts and different ratios that they put in there, but the end product was just beautifully balanced. Hazelnut came through clearly, chocolate came through clearly, the nuances of the various malts that they used came through clearly. Absolutely fantastic beer. Balance was beautiful. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the feeling and the intangible, subjectively, I loved it. Just another well-done beer that has hazelnut in it. I'm a fan. 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, overall this beer did very, very well. It lost a few points in a few categories. Kind of the biggest was obviously the head and retention, and it kind of is what it is. In the grand scheme of things, I thought it was an excellent example of the style. I only docked 1 point here. It gets a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Odd 13 Brewing Company's Hazelnut Uppercut to a 90 out of 100. So this is top tier beer, guys. Well above average. If you like big stouts, big flavored stouts, or if, like me in particular, you like hazelnut beers, this is one to seek. Very pronounced hazelnut. The chocolate was a nice addition. Tons of different malts with a lot of subtlety to it you don't often find in a stout. It's just a well-done package I highly recommend. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.